Hello, my name is Christine Hill, and today I will be sharing my research project with you. One of the government classes I took this year consisted of sitting down with my professor weekly and writing a research paper about something that impacted the political science world. When I first started thinking about what to write, I was lost. Could I write a paper about how Alexander Hamilton inspired theater kids to care about history? Probably not. But one day it struck me. My interpreting class is full of people who are passionate and driven. I knew this because one day when a woman came in to teach us about cochlear implants, we didn't ask questions related to the technology. We asked her if she was supporting the deaf community by advocating for sign language. So, as I was thinking about what to write, I found out a large majority of deaf people either don't know their rights when it comes to Americans with Disabilities Act, don't know how to file a complaint, or don't have the means to. During this process, I was lucky enough to interview people all over the country, in South Dakota, California, Illinois, New York, from deaf educators, deaf students, deaf professionals, and even an ADA lawyer. My goal throughout this project was to find out all of the issues with the ADA. However, now that I stand before you, I really do want to focus on what we can do as a community to solve these issues rather than the issues themselves. Before I dive right in, I just want to preface that I will be using the term disability because the ADA classifies deafness and hearing loss as a disability. I just want to say that this is not my opinion or the opinion of others I interviewed because many people in the deaf community view deafness as a rich cultural group, not a disability. Over 75% of deaf and hard of hearing kids are mainstreamed into the public school system. Being mainstreamed means that a deaf child, or any child with a disability, is put in a public school with little to no other peers that are disabled. This causes deaf students to rely on lip reading and sign language interpreters, and results in them getting as little as 40% of the message. The ADA prohibits disability discrimination in school districts as well as many after-school programs they host. For deaf children, prohibiting discrimination was not enough, and as a result, the ADA also works with the Individuals with Disability Education Acts and the Rehabilitation Act to support deaf students. These three laws are designed to support the least restrictive environment for students, effective communication, and an IEP. An IEP, or an Individualized Education Plan, is a contract that describes the deaf student's present academic levels and how their disability affects their ability to participate in the curriculum. In addition, the IEP outlines what special accommodations need to be provided for the student. Although these three laws working together should help the students prosper in the school system, in reality, the schools abuse their power to oppress deaf students. I will now give you 3 examples in 3 different states of how this is affecting students all over the country. In Illinois, a school teacher told me that school districts are more concerned about providing music classes than an ASL language class to deaf and hard of hearing kids. The schools in Illinois also do not prioritize total communication in their deaf schools. Instead, some teachers SimCom to accommodate the hard of hearing kids rather than using sign language for all kids to have access. Typically, with this style, signs are dropped and the deaf kids lose. The ADA prohibits discrimination of people with disabilities, but not discriminating is not the same as providing accessibility. In New York, 83%, or 581, of New York City's public schools are not fully ADA compliant. The New York City District Attorney filed a 75-page list of complaints and called for immediate action, which the mayor of New York City and the school districts ignored. In South Dakota, one school writes down every time their student wears her hearing aids and tries to use that information to prove that she does not need an interpreter. Schools claim they do not have enough money for interpreters and then use special education funds to pay tens of thousands of dollars to a school lawyer to fight the parents who complain. If this wasn't enough, the Argus Leader, a Sioux Falls newspaper, just released a 7-part investigation into how South Dakota is failing their kids. The sad part about these examples is that they are not unique. Education is arguably the most important area to get accessibility. If a student does not have adequate accessibility, then their language is delayed. This goes on to affect every single part of their life in the future. This picture shows that the biggest employment gap between deaf and hearing people are with those who have a high school education or below. An estimated 48% of deaf people are unemployed in the United States. Deaf people struggle to thrive in the workforce because the Americans with Disabilities Act does not require effective enough accommodations and does not hold businesses accountable for discrimination. The ADA requires businesses to provide reasonable accommodations in all areas of employment, including hiring and firing, job training, meetings, and any other benefits and privileges of employment equal to those enjoyed by similarly situated employees without disabilities. One glaring issue with employment is that there's no definition for what a valid complaint is. My ASL mentor explained to me that complaints are filed in 2 different departments. So even if you have a valid issue in one department, because he is deaf, it gets filed under communication issues and then is not valid. This means that if you file a complaint as a deaf user of American Sign Language in regards to technology issues or technology accessibility, the complaint is filed under a communication issue and then is deemed not valid because it does not meet those specific requirements. Another issue is that businesses often confuse the words accessible with accommodation. I interned for the Department of Rehabilitation last summer as part of my government requirements, and I went to go advocate for a man who lost his job. When we were there, we asked the manager if he had provided accommodations for this employee, and he said no, because we treat everyone equally. We tried to explain that that's not actually equal, because the person with the disability needed special accommodations in order to be able to do the job same as other people, but it was too late. They'd already had the man sign a paper to confirm that he was quitting and not being fired. And the man said yes, he understood these terms, even when he did not, because he had no accommodations. It was too late. There was nothing we could do. The last issue I want to discuss before talking about solutions is the medical field. Due to a lack of knowledge about deaf needs, the stress of money, and a tight schedule, medical facilities often do not take the time to accommodate deaf patients. When going to a doctor's appointment, deaf people often do not have adequate access to communication. Because of this, deaf people who use ASL had a 97% greater likelihood of using the ER than hearing people. The Americans with Disabilities Act requires that businesses provide a reasonable accommodation towards their consumer. Often, doctors' offices interpret this as not needing to provide sign language interpreter and just writing back and forth. There are multiple issues with this because deaf people who use ASL often have lower English reading literacy than the clinicians and staff who would be writing to them in a note. In addition to this, the process of writing back and forth is very slow, could use big vocabulary, and doctors tend to have illegible writing. It is understandable when diagnosing a common cold to write or use pictures, but imagine a doctor writing back and forth to explain a cancer diagnosis instead of hiring an interpreter. There's no equivalency, and the patient would leave confused. Patients can also get misdiagnosed and mistreated. If a patient uses strong ASL with little to no English literacy, then it would be difficult to explain your symptoms if you do not know the English words for them. This happened when a deaf man visited the emergency room to treat a painful attack caused by his gout. He walked into the hospital with a splint on his foot. There was no interpreter present, so the man could not explain his issues. The doctors took an x-ray, and despite not finding a fracture, they thought, well, this hurts so much, it may be broken. So they put a half cast on him, which is not what he needed. He needed gout medication. When the doctor decided to take the easy route and not find the best form of communication for his deaf person, he could have ended up with a malpractice suit. If a deaf person is misdiagnosed, that is a bigger issue than just not complying with the ADA. Now that we've touched on the issues of the ADA, it's important to discuss what we can do as a community. First, when I spoke with an ADA lawyer, he explained that he fights for his clients free of charge and tries to solve the cases in under a year, but that is not always reasonable. One of the women I interviewed stated that she would sue all of the time if it was free and easy to do. She said, I am not litigious happy, but I need to make sure that the 2-year-old deaf child I know and the 5-year-old deaf child I know will grow up and have 100% access no matter what. So if I had the access, I would sue for their benefit. What the lack of enforcement and amount of intersectionality in each disability class shows us is that there's not one easy solution. It is unreasonable to believe that the ADA will be amended again or new legislation will be created, so we must find a different solution to get the same result. Offering sign language classes in more schools is a simple way to start educating people on deaf culture. Once people begin to be educated and see the benefits of ASL, the more schools will offer it. In addition, more deaf people are in the spotlight advocating for it. People like Niall DeMarco, who was the first winner of America's Next Top Model and Dancing with the Stars, and Marlee Matlin, the first Deaf Academy Award winner, are using their privilege and platform and their TV show, Switched at Birth, to advocate for ASL and deaf rights. This has led to an increase in people wanting to learn sign language. Next, we need to work towards LEAD K being passed in all 50 states. LEAD K is the Language Equality and Acquisition for Deaf Kids initiative. The goal of LEAD K is to work towards kindergarten readiness for deaf and hard of hearing children by promoting access to both American Sign Language and English. Virtually no overarching organization exists that supports deaf people in all aspects of life, and the goal is to inspire to change that. The Communication Services for the Deaf here in South Dakota is an amazing resource for deaf people, and they do so much. They advocate for students, work with deaf immigrants, and help file complaints to the ADA. Unfortunately, CSD does not exist in every single state or do as much as the team here does. The National Association of the Deaf also pledges advocacy and policy support, but only provides legal support for impact cases, which are cases that would set a precedent and change life in the deaf community. I believe that we need a national service that does what CSD does, as well as other businesses, but on a larger scale. It would be beneficial if this theoretical business could host workshops or seminars for anyone with a disability to come to so they can learn what their rights are. In the education system, this organization could set up a certification system for schools. Ideally, we could work with an accredited body, similar to those that label blue ribbon schools, and ensure ADA compliance. To encourage schools to want to be checked for compliance, we could waive the fee if they meet under a certain number of violations. This would encourage schools to become more compliant by themselves and then reward them with a free check to ensure that everything is accessible. This would be established on a number scale so that parents know what is best for this child. There could be a number awarded for overall compliance, as well as have smaller categories for schools that have exceptional programs that benefit students with disabilities, including deaf, blind, autistic, and wheelchair accessible. For the medical profession, technology improvement is very important. Having websites that sign and explain common illnesses is helpful, but it is not enough. Improving technology so that we can use video remote interpreters on the screen without experiencing connectivity issues would be helpful. In addition, possibly creating a device that could show a deaf person's body part in 3D so the interpreter has better vision, almost like a holograph. Technology is the most important development in the medical profession because it would increase the ability for deaf people to learn about their bodies and wellness with visual examples. Lastly, overall the most important thing we want to accomplish is to provide resources. We could host seminars for medical students or employers to learn how to best interact, communicate, and work with deaf people, and to teach about institutionalized oppression. The ADA office in Sioux Falls helped provide inspiration for these workshops and seminars because they have a brochure that teaches interested parties how to do just that. This encourages education and eliminates the ability to claim ignorance for lack of accessibility. In addition, we would also have a list of aging services that are deaf-friendly or resources for those who become deaf later in life so that they can continue to live with communication and accessibility. I know that many of these solutions require long-term planning, funding, and resources to produce, but there are things that we can all do right now. The easiest answer is to educate yourself. Steps that you can take include taking a sign language class, taking a minute to read the articles about the ADA law changes, and learn about the laws that are threatening or helping the deaf community. And we can also learn how to recognize systematic oppression or your own subconscious stereotypes. If everyone learns to be a little kinder towards each other and understand each other's hardships, a lot would change. Thank you.